Hello everyone, welcome to this episode of Maritime SoftwareHub, the People Podcast. It's the first show of 2025 and I'm really delighted to welcome our new guest and the first time on the podcast is Richard Buckley, the founder and CEO of 90% of Everything. So thank you very much for coming on the podcast today, Richard. We're going to talk through your solution and how you're enhancing fleet operations through OpenOcean Studio. So welcome to the episode. I'd love it if you could give us a brief overview of yourself and your background.
Yeah, sure. I guess I'm not sure I can say I'm still new to maritime, but my majority of career was actually spent in oil and gas. I spent 20 odd years in oil and gas. Originally as an engineer, I used to build refineries and then moved into the upstream business and then decided to take quite a drastic career change and decided to move into maritime. But that was some 8 years ago now. I moved out of oil and gas and went to work for a large owner-operator. And then beyond that, 7 years ago, I took the decision to start up a company called 90% of Everything to address what I saw was an opportunity and a challenge in the industry regarding the use of technology for fleet operations.
Yeah, fantastic move. And I'm looking back through your profile. So obviously places like BP and your education background as well, doing a master's and all different things you've been doing over the years in different countries, it looks like, in terms of studies and things. So
yeah, refer back to that now, bizarrely. You learn all these things and then you maybe forget them for a while, but then suddenly you refer back to them, especially my MBA comes in more useful now than perhaps it ever did in my career.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask that a little bit later, but that's really interesting. So you find, you would say that's really valuable and definitely worthwhile your time investing in that?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Good. All right, then. Well, I'd love it if you could share an overview of the platform and obviously the business that's 90% of Everything, and we can go from there.
Yeah, sure. So if I look back 7 years ago, as I said, I was with a big, large owner-operator and really trying to understand what technologies there were out in the marketplace. I was their CTO at the time, actually. What opportunities there were and what solutions there were out in the marketplace. And I guess if I refer back to my past, you mentioned BP in oil and gas, is I'd seen this evolution of technology where, maybe sort of traditional transactional systems persisted for many years. And then a lot of the oil and gas companies tried to build their own. And then what we saw was the evolution of what I call true platform technology. And by that, I mean highly modularized, but also trying to do more than just manage transactions, trying to actually lift out that data, those transactions, and start to drive different decision making. And when I looked across the industry, it felt like the maritime industry was still to some extent perhaps playing catch up in that space, and really was still dominated by what I would call sort of a more legacy transactional ERP landscape. There was, I guess, since we started, there was a significant growth of startups. We saw many startups seeing the maritime industry as perhaps low-hanging fruit, if I'm honest, and building out some fairly niche solutions for the industry. But as we evolved, what we started to see was the challenge they were having is that the maritime companies didn't want a plethora of systems. They were actually quite wedded to their sort of monolithic ERPs because it was all in one house. Yeah. And therefore, really the intent of 90POE and our platform, OpenOcean Studio, was to build that modularization, to try and elevate decision-making, but also acknowledge that functional depth, that sort of feature depth that's required from an ERP needed to be built out as well. So it's been a long 7 years of hard work and build to build the right functional depth, but also to build that sort of what I regard as very modern modular platform technology. Yeah. That's really what we're about. I guess, what do we offer that's slightly different? There's a couple of things. One is we tried to bring the entire life cycle into one platform. So from commercial decisions being made at the sort of chartering end, all the way through operational and technical execution. So you'd normally see what would be called a voyage management system, maybe connected to a technical ERP or an operational ERP. And then we've also built in from day one all of the performance side, so vessel and voyage performance. So building those digital twins and looking to optimize. So I guess we saw that in the landscape, that's often sits across maybe 3 or 4 different systems. We chose to build that all in the same platform so that our customers have the ability to optimize commercial decision making, or also understand commercial implications of operational decision making.
Yeah, no, it sounds like a fantastic solution. I mean, we've obviously been aware of you guys over the years and met at events and things. It's great to see the growth and the new clients you've been onboarding and things and partnerships you're having. So really, really many congratulations on how the business has grown. So I guess if you don't mind me asking, that initial step when you saw the opportunity and you wanted to start the business, what were those kind of early days like the first sort of 6 months or to a year, like in terms of getting the ideas together and then putting it into action and maybe getting team members assembled, that type of thing?
So I guess this is the point where I meant to say that I had this grand vision 7 years ago, and what we've delivered is exactly what I had the vision around it, and it wouldn't be true. It couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, I think one of the challenges you have when you're building a technology company, especially in a space like the maritime industry, is to learn to adapt. So early days, the intent was to build that sort of overarching platform, but to try and tie in pre-existing technologies available in the marketplace. That was always our bias. I guess as we've gone along, we've learned that that's not that easy to do in the industry we're in. Many of the systems are legacy. They're not really designed to be interconnected. And therefore, we've had to build out more of those modules. So that meant having to learn an awful lot more about some of the functional depth, having to learn how to build technology teams. Whilst I've always worked in the sort of interface between technology operations, I've never run a technology company. So I had to learn how to recruit, how to build out technology, how to hire the right people to do that, but also to learn from feedback and learn from what the customers really needed, how to be agile and adopt really the offer we were building out. So we've probably built much more of an ERP than I ever thought we would. But actually, that's something that we're now seeing in the marketplace being demanded. People want everything in one shop. They want to be able to go into a system and do the day-to-day, but also get the insights to do things differently. So, it's been a learning journey.
Yeah, no, very interesting. I mean, we obviously help on the recruitment side, startups and scale-ups, and it's really interesting to hear people's perspective about the commercial decisions, I guess, like in terms of how they start their team. Do they want to try and obviously get the tech ready first, but do they want to find a subject matter expert that can kind of go to market, or do they want just kind of sales hunters to try and just get as many leads in and things? So it's interesting to hear people's path and the route they take to market.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously we've known each other for a while. I would say the domain knowledge in this space is absolutely critical. And it's not an industry that I think the sort of normal go-to-market sales approach works very well in. We always describe the industry as it's very unusual in the sense that it's got this long tail of our customers, so owners, operators. You know, I think the average size owner owns about 7 to 10 vessels. Yet there's 85,000 commercial vessels in the world, which means there's lots of small companies who sit on that long tail of ownership, but they are highly networked. So the shipping industry knows each other, and therefore they put a lot of weighting on you having a true understanding of their business. And it's not a case of knock on the door and turn up and tell them what you've got to sell. They normally want to start by explaining what they're doing. You're expected to not only understand that, but have some way of responding to that with the technology you've built. I often tell people, I think one of our first big customers, I'll never forget, I was set up with a call with them, and it was a 2-hour call, and I never even got to demo what we'd built. Oh, wow. And they just literally threw acronyms at me. And I said, look, would you like to see what we've built? And he said, no, I don't really care. My guess is, you're a modern technology company. What you've built will be great. But what I really need to know is that you understand my business. So we ended up having a 2-hour conversation, much more about shipping in general and the challenges of shipping, not the technology. But that was the opener that then got us the opportunity to go and do a demo of what we've built.
That's fascinating. Okay, awesome. Good. I completely agree. I find most of the hires we make typically are people from either a chartering background, broking, or obviously they've been on board a vessel in some capacity, or they've got a marine engineering degree, that type of thing, if they're selling more of a vessel performance based solution. So although there definitely are people, some of the companies are getting a little bit more Americanized from what I can see, the SaaS
Yeah.
companies, especially with these big investors coming in, and that's changed the role structures. What I'm seeing, like more SDRs, like sales enablement managers, those type of functions, which probably weren't around 5 or 10 years ago. And that's introducing more people from outside of shipping into our markets, which is good. But I would still think that the out and out kind of front of office sales hunters, that they need to have that core understanding of the market. So anyway, that's very interesting. But thank you for your insights there. So what I'm looking at and seeing on obviously your business and on the website is lots of things focused around efficiency and sustainability in maritime operations. So how does the platform kind of support that and promote that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, sustainability is a hot topic right now. I mean, let's talk about efficiency first. If you look at the industry, it's still dominated by people pretty much doing the things they've done for decades. And that's why the sort of legacy ERPs continue to persist, actually. So it's heavily biased towards experience, expertise, intuition, and then the use of technologies behind that to some extent is secondary, and it's about capturing those decisions or those transactions for reporting purposes. And that talks probably more to the sustainability side. But if we look to the efficiency side, if we look outside of the maritime industry, and it was interesting what you mentioned about externals coming into the industry. You know, I think that external provocation is always good. It always challenges the status quo. But if we look at what technology is doing in many other industries, people are lifting above the transactions to start using that data, maybe not to make decisions. I'm not a great believer of sort of data-driven decisions, but to support decisions or to underpin intuition and experience. And I think the industry now is at that point where it's just going through that cycle. So for me, the efficiency piece is actually people don't need to be, and let's pick a real example, maybe people don't need to check every single invoice. Technology is pretty good at doing that. If you have a procurement tool and you understand what you're procuring, maybe what you should be doing is highlighting to someone to check the things that are unexpected or out of a boundary condition, rather than checking every single invoice that comes in. I often use the example, for digital banking in our world. When I grew up as a kid, my dad taught me to keep every receipt. And at the end of every month, I got my bank statement and I went through it with a ruler and checked off everything to say that the receipts were right and I hadn't had a payment that I wasn't expecting. None of us do that today. I mean, if I told my kids to do that, they would look at me like I was mad. Why? Because when we make a purchase today, it pops up on our phone immediately. And if we're in a coffee shop and we buy a coffee and it pops up on my phone, I'll never check that receipt because I was there when it happened. When I get a pop-up and I'm not in a shop and I wasn't making a transaction, they're the ones you check. They're the ones that you say, oh, that's unusual. My bank even tells me if it needs approval or if it was actually blocked because it was fraudulent. That type of technology being brought to our industry, I think, is really interesting because it will give people an efficiency gain in not doing everything as they used to, but starting to do what we call manage by exception. So why don't I focus on the things that are most valuable, most important, rather than focusing on everything because I can? And that's where I think we can use the technology to real effect.
So are you not pushing, but are you thinking efficiency is more of a time saving element or a cost saving or both?
Well, I mean, efficiency is a broad term because we can also talk, of course, about vessel efficiency, the area that probably there's more startups than anybody in. We can talk about that. But if we talked, I was thinking more operational efficiency first of all. I think it's a time saving. I don't like the model of, well, what does that mean from a cost perspective? Because you end up talking about headcount and reduction in headcount or people costs. For me, it's more about if people aren't doing, and back to my example, if people aren't checking every single invoice, what could they be doing that is more valuable, that arguably would have a significant value enabler rather than it being a pure cost saving? So, if I'm not checking every invoice, maybe I'm negotiating better strategic deals with suppliers that actually would be far more valuable. If we talk about efficiency from a vessel perspective, which ties into the sustainability question you asked, I mean, this is an area that has been, significantly addressed by a number of different startups, all trying to do the same thing. And that is, can you more efficiently route vessels, predominantly to save fuel? It's interesting in the changes that have come from decarbonisation. Only probably 5 years ago, that conversation was quite a tough conversation to have because you needed to be having it with the payer of the fuel. And if you were anywhere else in the value chain where they weren't paying for the fuel, actually the level of interest in saving fuel was quite low. In a world where carbon matters, that responsibility is now shared across the value chain. So maybe you're not the purchaser of fuel, but you still have to capture, report on the carbon emissions. Maybe you still have to buy EUAs. So there's a much broader stakeholder group in a world of decarbonisation that all care now about fundamentally what comes down to consumption of fuel.
Okay.
So there's a lot of focus on, sorry, I was just going to touch on the efficiency piece. What I have seen is there's only in our short 7 years, there's been a bit of a bursting of a bubble. Probably in the last 2 to 3 years, there was lots of startups with, and I'm probably not very popular for saying this, making some fairly wild promises of savings by taking a vessel they'd never seen before and giving it a better route, different waypoints, different timings, and making a saving. And those savings are very, very hard to validate because you don't have two vessels the same that sail different routes to compare. And therefore, there's always an open question of how accurate are the digital twins? How accurate were the decisions you make? I mean, I saw some early days that would give you an optimized 30-day voyage. Given weather conditions are only really credible up to 5 days ahead, I don't know how you would ever be able to achieve such a thing. So I think there's a maturing in the market now about voyage optimization that says it's actually a daily thing. It's a thing that needs to be revised, but there is absolutely real opportunity on the table for making savings in consumption, both by the routing of the vessel, but also how the vessel executes its voyage. So the classic example of going constant power or constant RPM versus what most of the global fleet still do, which is a constant speed over ground, is a genuine opportunity for a reduction in consumption.
This is probably a slightly sensitive question, but in general, do you think charterers are more open to the conversation about efficiency than the ship owners, or is there different kind of like perspectives?
I think the entire game's changed. And I think the entire game has changed down to, I mean, we obviously had EU RMRV, and then we had ETS, and now we've obviously got Fuel EU coming as well. The game has changed because that responsibility for overall carbon emissions is shared across the value chain. And I genuinely have a belief, coming from an oil and gas background, that even if we look at the examples we have now, so CII and ETS and Fuel EU, we are on a journey towards absolute carbon. And absolute carbon will mean an expectation you need to be able to track and report, irrespective of your role in that value chain. So whether you're the producer, the owner operator, the charterer, the ultimate consumer, you will have a role in understanding the overall carbon contribution. And therefore, I think we have shared ownership. And that, for me, is really exciting because actually there's a genuine interest to have an understanding and an optimization conversation that I think even 3 or 4 years ago was really tough. It was really tough.
Yeah, brilliant. Good. Okay, move on to the next sort of topic, and that's kind of one we're seeing a lot more of in recent days or years. It is the partnership piece and alliances with businesses. You mentioned earlier having more of an open source, open API kind of like collaboration with other businesses. So we saw obviously you collaborate with Navarino and some other businesses. So can you tell us a bit about that, the choice, the reason behind those sort of partnerships and how it benefits the solution?
Sure. And the good news is this we strategically did decide on day one. We always wanted to be more open and collaborative, and it probably comes more from my background. We didn't want the sort of walled garden effect of having a technology that was closed, that we sort of maintained our customers on within our environment. We always saw the opportunity that the flow of data and the integration of systems was all about benefiting our end customers, because at the end of the day, the ability to go across and do their entire business end to end is what they're looking for. So one of our strategic decisions, and it was ironically why we called it OpenOcean Studio, was that we would be entirely open, we would be API first, and we would support and actually quite actively promote both partnerships where we don't have functionality, but also partnerships that complete a gap for our customers. Navarino is a great example. I guess they're not so much in the core functionality side, but they're in the connectivity business. Our customers use OpenOcean Studio on board the vessels. We have an installation version of OpenOcean Studio. Part of me wishes we didn't, but until we see the global fleet connected to Starlink, we still have to assume that vessels do need something installed that can run offline. And we work very closely with Navarino to initially really endorse our product to be run on their infrastructure on board. But what we discovered in that partnership is actually they have a real rich set of APIs on their side that can be brought into our system. I'll pick a very small example, but one that's actually really delighted our customers is we're just right now working on integrating our crewing solution with their crew Wi-Fi. And therefore, we can tell their system when the crew are on board, we can tell them what allocations they have. The crew can go on board and use the same connectivity and passwords to use the crew Wi-Fi for speaking to home. But also if the crew want to buy more, they no longer need to go and ask for a voucher. We can take that and bring that right back into the master's general accounts and right back into the crew payroll, all seamlessly. So that's an efficiency game for the office, but it's a real benefit for the seafarers as well. So those types of partnerships for me are really important. We obviously have a number of partnerships. We have partnerships for weather, we have partnerships for AIS, but we also have partnerships for things like connectivity with Navarino and also functionality. So areas that we don't cover, things like port agent assignments, we have a strong partnership with Harbour Lab for, as an example, and Procureship for that sort of supplier e-marketplace.
Interesting. Okay. And how do you typically vet or choose the partners? Is it yourself or the team that go out and assess them, or is it just recommendations?
It's a bit of both. We do have to do a technology vetting component because there are obviously some technologies out there that aren't so modern, and the reality of trying to interconnect them with APIs is harder. But all of the technologies I just talked about there and the partners we have, they all exist as fairly modern offers in the marketplace. And actually, therefore, the integration is seamless for our customers all the way through to sort of single sign-on integration, which is nice because it means ultimately the end user gets an efficiency gain from it. But we do get recommendations as well, of course, from our customers. And we try to also understand who are the market leaders, who are the people. Navarino is a great example. They have a very significant dominance across the industry for the commercial maritime sector. And therefore, by working with them, that unlocks our technology for many customers who are already using their services and vice versa.
Okay, awesome. I've always been a little bit confused, to be honest with you, with the satellite communications, the connectivity piece with maritime. We understand the key providers, and there's lots of different areas to it. But I mean, with the Starlink, so it seems to me that obviously Starlink is possibly a big threat to some of the well-established businesses. But how are they integrating with Starlink, like the Navarinos, Inmarsats, those sort of guys? Yeah. How can you explain a bit?
Well, okay, you picked two different models there. So, I mean, Navarino. I mean, let's not make any mistake around it. The reality is the connectivity business is a highly commoditized business now, and a very competitive one. So, whether it's Navarino or one of their competitors, they are all trying to leverage relationships with the underlying connectivity suppliers like Starlink or Inmarsat or Iridium, and provide some value-adding service to the end user. So really, their value add is about the infrastructure they provide on board, the way they bring, LEO, GEO, and even LTE connectivity together seamlessly, so that effectively the vessels remain connected all the time and are leveraging the lowest cost, highest bandwidth offer that the vessel can have. So if you're in a Starlink area, you leverage Starlink. If you lose Starlink, you may switch over to an Inmarsat GEO, and maybe when you're in port, you might switch over to an LTE. So the real value out of something like a Navarino is about providing technology, ultimately infrastructure and software on board that can deal with that, optimize that, and then provide value-adding services on top of that so that effectively the vessels stay connected, stay compliant, and have access to the systems they need.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Good. There's more of a personal thing, but yeah, no, great. I'm sure our listeners will find that helpful as well. So we talked about lots about the opportunities and what you've been doing, the business, the solution that you guys offer. So what about any kind of challenges you foresee in this sort of digitalization of shipping?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few. I started with one actually. I mean, the industry is still dominated by the expectation that it's run through experience, intuition, and intimate knowledge. And I think that there is a journey we still need to go on about truly trusting technology to not replace. And I never like the terminology of replace, but to enhance, to augment those skills through modern technology that can actually take data and derive new insights. One of the offers we have in our platform is a tool called On Radar, where we're effectively monitoring the global fleet 24/7. We have an event-based system, and we can tell people things that have either happened, not so useful, I know, are happening, quite useful, or even more useful, may happen going forward. So a great example would be, bad weather on a voyage that exceeds a certain set of thresholds for that vessel. By being able to promote that and tell people about that, we're not trying to say we're going to make the decisions. We're not trying to say we're going to replace the requirement for experience and intuition. But what we are saying is, actually, we can tell you about these things and focus your experience on the things that really matter, that will deliver the greatest results or the greatest value. I think we're on a journey in this industry on that. I mean, pre-COVID, I even spoke to some smaller customers that were still running their fleet pretty much on a whiteboard. So this shift towards technology and trusting technology and data to tell them things they maybe didn't know about, I think is a journey we're on. I think the other one, and it's probably not, again, a very popular thing to raise, but the baseline of acceptable expenditure on technology in maritime makes it fairly unattractive for new entrants. So, there's this sort of unwritten $10,000 per vessel per year ERP cost that seems to sit across the industry. And that's probably what they used to spend on traditional legacy ERPs. But when you take a global fleet size of 80,000, you reduce that to a sort of sensible addressable market, and you multiply that out. That makes it hard for new entrants to access investment, because it's just a limited overall target addressable market for a return on investment. So I think we will see a shift where, or I hope we will see a shift where, if the value truly is delivered from these newer technologies that can do things differently, then I think we might see a shift towards perhaps more value-based pricing, where there is an opportunity for the technology companies to raise that threshold above that level. Because at the level it is, I think we will struggle to see a lot of credible new entrants. And we've already seen, as I'm sure maybe you've even spoken to them, there have been some that have come and gone already in only a short number of years, where they've really tried, they've maybe got some investment, but to get a return on that investment that satisfies a VC or a PE requires a significant more revenue opportunity than the market currently supports.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Great. Thank you. And you touched upon it earlier. You said you have a module that's related to the crewing. So how do you see, from your perspective, kind of technology supporting kind of the role of seafarers going forward?
Oh, I just did a talk about this in Manila actually, because I was
Connect,
asked if I'd be on a Crew Connect. I was asked if I'd be on a panel to say that AI wouldn't impact the role of seafarers, and I smiled because I said I could almost argue this either way. The point I made there, and I'd make it here, is this isn't about replacing. I think the role of seafarers on vessels is absolutely critical. It is a career that's time served, experience based, knowledge based, requires a lot of training. But I think what we've done to the seafarers over probably the last decade and a half, especially due to regulatory requirements, is we've asked more of them from a manual reporting perspective and less from a can you focus on safe maritime navigation and perhaps optimization so that you can actually improve voyage results. So I think that's the opportunity for technology, which is where actually much of the work they do. And, I got the luxury of spending some time on board some vessels early in my maritime career. And I was shocked. I saw them filling out 5 noon reports to different departments even for the same day. That doesn't make sense. I mean, technology can replace all this. And therefore, I think what we'll see is a less demand on crew for manual data entry and multiple data entry. I think there will be an expectation that where they do need to submit data, they do it less, but it needs to be right, because it will then support all of the opportunities for optimization going forward. So I think we'll see a reduction in their digital manual workload. And I think we'll then see them getting access to some of the tools that give them the opportunity to improve performance. I think that will genuinely enrich their experience on board. If you're a seafarer and you want to be a seafarer, you join because you enjoy sailing and you enjoy the opportunity for executing voyages safely and optimally. And I think letting them have that opportunity to be able to do that is something that I think will be a real positive for the seafarers. Do I think it replaced them? Absolutely not. I'm not a big fan of the debate that seems to have calmed down now around fully autonomous vessels. I think there is a place for them, but it's not going to be in deep sea, long sea voyages. I think, unless you're going to start talking about multiple main engines and completely reconfiguring a vessel, the reality is you're going to need people on board to maintain them and to make sure they're safely navigating. And for me, that's the real opportunity I think we'll see.
Yeah, no, really interesting. I mean, we've had a few guests on the show, like Credentials and Tiller. Previously, obviously, very focused on the crewing piece of technology, and it seems like they're even travel arrangements and obviously safety on board vessels through better kind of camera monitoring and alerts and things seems to be really kind of growing and evolving, which is really exciting to see. So, yeah,
I think the only bit I'd say on that one, because it's an interesting one about the cameras. I know it was an early debate. I think we as an industry, and I'm talking about the maritime technology industry now, we need to find a way of enrolling seafarers when we work with our customers better. Because I know early days, we don't talk so much about IoT now, but I'd heard comments from seafarers where, someone would come on board and put a little black box in the corner and they were told it was monitoring everything that was going on in the vessel. And then they put cameras on and they were told that was monitoring everything. But nothing was given back to the seafarers. And, I heard stories where those boxes became miraculously disconnected over time. And I'm not surprised because actually, why are we not giving this data back to them? Why are we not letting them leverage the insights of these systems as well? Because at the end of the day, they're the ones sailing the vessel. They're the ones who actually have the real opportunity to optimize voyages and drive safer and more sustainable voyages. So I think we need to get them a bit more involved, because actually if they see what the data collection systems are doing and what it can give them, they will feel far more supportive about making sure those systems run optimally. So I think that's just a catch. I think we need to make sure we let them know what we're doing with it and get them more involved with it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Awesome. Okay, well, thank you very much. Is there anything before we move on a little bit more to about your personal kind of roles that you've been in? And anything else you'd like to share about the 90 POE platform at all, or the business?
No. I think we've covered most of the key areas.
Awesome. Good. So, I mean, you mentioned earlier, you've obviously been in different kind of role functions, like a CIO and a chief technology officer and things. So also a chief executive officer. So can you just give a bit of an overview of the differences? So when you're in those certain roles, let's maybe if we just pick a CEO, a CTO and a CIO, chief information officer, that would be really, really helpful, I think, for some of our listeners.
Okay. I guess it's probably interesting more the similarities as well, actually, than the differences. So I was a CIO for a long time in my career in BP. And as I mentioned, although I started as an engineer, I've always sat on that interface between engineering operations and technology. And I think the role of a CIO is to be listening to those parts of the business and understanding and making sure that the underlying technology delivers the services that those businesses need to do to enact their job. So, you get to deeply understand a business And then the intention of a CIO is to make sure the underlying technology offer or IT offer to that business supports their objectives. I think the subtlety of the differences between CIO and CTO is that a CTO, I think, is often looking, and I know all these titles, we had CDOs and we had a variety of roles mentioned, but for me, a CTO is not just providing the underlying technology services, but it's about having an eye on the future direction. So what is the direction of the business? Being more active in the organizational's leadership of challenging what does a business want to do, and therefore what role should technology play within that. So often being more strategic, I would argue. And when I was a CTO for the owner-operator maritime company, it's about actually provoking a debate that may sound like it's an organizational decision, but actually may have an underlying technology rationale, and saying, well, actually, I think technology can help with this, or actually you're over-relying on technology to solve this, where it's actually a people issue or a capability issue. So for me, a CTO should have an eye on a horizon beyond today. It often should be looking externally. I'm very proud that I've moved in and out of different industries, because although they're different, they share similarities, but it gives you a broader view of what good looks like. And it doesn't always have to come from the sector you're in. So, maritime often is reflected as often the one people turn to is airline industries. I think there's good and bad to that. Some stuff is great from airlines, but, you're also talking about aircraft that follow predefined routes, and they're very heavily instrumented, and they get lots of data, and there's lots of investment in data acquisition. That's not true of maritime. I think you should also look at other heavy industries that maybe don't share the same technology budgets that perhaps the airline industry does, to see how we can learn from those as well. So for me, CTO is peripheral industries, longer term horizon, and more of a strategic advisory role to an organization about where technology can add value.
Great.
And then obviously CEO now is 90 POE, to some extent has to bring all that together. But obviously the key component of that is having that vision. Now, obviously for 90% of everything, it's a technology driven vision internally, but it's very much focused on a business outcomes for our customers. So in 90 POE, we focus on the technology we build, but it's not technology for technology's sake. It's about building the technology we believe can truly move the dial for our customers from a value perspective. And that, for me, is the difference. Obviously, the other piece about being a CEO, and I think it's true in all the roles, but perhaps it's a little bit lonelier as a CEO, it's about leadership. Leadership as a CIO tends to be within an IT team. As a CTO, I think it's, as I mentioned, broader. But of course, as a CEO, the concept is the leadership is for the whole organization. It's about building an organization that is far stronger than the sum of its parts. And therefore, by actually making sure you recruit the right people, you get people to work in an organization frame that gives the space for creativity, but also allows people and talent within the organization to take the organization further forward. So, we have 220 odd people today. Irrespective of their role, I still welcome all of them to the organization, and I tell them all that it doesn't matter what level of the organization they sit at within 90 POE. It's all about their opportunity to contribute to our journey. And you mentioned earlier, it may be through domain expertise, it may be through technology expertise, it may be through sales expertise. But for me, it's about being, as a CEO, being able to unlock that, to allow all those individuals to bring the very best of what they can offer to the organization.
Awesome.
So,
okay.
Hopefully that answers your question. I don't know if you're looking for something else in there.
No, it does. It's perfect. And when I think of a CEO, you kind of think, oh, they're the big boss. They don't have anyone above them. But what's that bit like above there, where you've got shareholders and board members, perhaps for certain companies? What's that relationship and that dynamic like?
That's very different, and it's interesting because you say about the big boss. I mean, I'm sat in our office today, and I don't have an office. Bizarrely, someone came in the other day and assumed this was my office because it's a little extra room. I don't. I sit on the floor with everyone else. We all hot desk because I think probably in my previous career I did the sort of the hierarchical side and tried not to recreate that in 90%. So we run 90POE quite flat, actually. We all sit on Slack, and a new start, I offer every new start, if they want to Slack me a question, they can, and more often than not, they do. Probably I'm more accessible than I should be, but that for me is about creating an environment where we don't really have that level of hierarchy that restricts people's creativity and bringing things to the table. Of course, that's very different when you're the CEO dealing with the investors. And obviously, from an investment perspective, it's all about being able to present a clear view of a strategy, a clear view of a vision that we want to deliver against, but then being able to back that up with sort of the reality of reporting against the hard deliverables, whether that's the features we've committed to, the customers we've onboarded, the revenue we've achieved, or the spend we have. So it's about having that balance of long-term view, because that's candidly what you have to have as a CEO, but also being able to bring that down to what would be, I guess, normally called sort of the day-to-day performance management, and being able to bridge those two.
Fantastic. Okay, brilliant. All right, thank you very much. Well, I'll let you crack on and head off shortly. But one last question, I like to always ask this. Outside of work, obviously, what do you like to get up to in your kind of spare time?
Wow, for the little I have. So I have two kids who both do a sport I used to do when I was young, which is rowing. So I spend most of my time outside of work running them around for rowing events, which I enjoy. And then any additional time I have, I'm a bit of a car nut. So I'm actually just rebuilding an old VW Beetle with my son at the minute, who's 15.
Oh, wow,
so teaching him how to weld and do stuff like that, which is my real off time, actually. When you've got a welder or a grinder in your hand, it's hard to let your mind drift back to work for a while. It's best to focus on the job. So that's pretty much it. But more hours probably than it should be spent working, but definitely prioritizing that with family time.
No, excellent. Great. Well, it's very nice to hear it. And I really, really appreciate all your insights and learning more about 90POE from your perspective is really important and very grateful.
No, thank you.
My pleasure. So if anyone would like to reach out to you or perhaps a member of the team with any questions, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
So obviously we have our website, which is will be attached on this, I think, when we send out the link anyway, I guess, Callum. If not, I'm on LinkedIn. If not, people can email me directly, but any of those routes is an option. Probably the website gives you all of the contact details you need to reach out to us.
Awesome. All right, great. Well, thank you so much, Richard, and thank you to everyone for listening again. It's great to be kind of back now in a new year, new series of episodes coming. So thank you for listening, and take care, everyone.